Thanks for listening to the AZ Wildcats podcast brought to you by DraftKings. NBA playoffs are in full effect. That means you put down $5, you get $150 in free plays just as long as you're a new customer. It doesn't even matter who wins. All right, now, as we talked about, joined by one of the dons of the sports scene, a guy who doesn't want to be called the boss of all bosses, but was fine with being put in the commission, Mr. William Brad Allis.
How you doing, Mike?
Not too bad, Brad. How you been, dude?
Good.
All right, let's get to some hoops then. So, Henri Veesaar ends up committing the thing that a lot of people knew about, but nobody really reported, became public last Friday. Veesaar, wherever you look at it, considered one of the 5 or 6 best European prospects in the world, commits to Arizona. He will be here next year. Brad, I had somebody ask me a very poignant question that I thought was also showed me how far back he went with U of A basketball. He looked at the picture and he said, "Is this a coordinated Ivan Radenovich?" And I'm okay with Ivan personally.
Ivan's one of the, if you're talking an all kind of overlooked team, Ivan might be your big on that team. I mean, we're talking a team with like a guy like Chris Mills,
right?
I would almost put Ray O's on that team. Guys who are really pretty good and we kind of forget about, either because of how long they were here and, more importantly, usually how the team fared in the tournament. Chris Mills, I don't think ever got to the second weekend.
Right.
You look at Ivan and, you had the collapse. Unfortunately, he was on that team that collapsed in Chicago. But Ivan was a really good player. And I do see some similarities there. I think my initial, from watching those Zapruder films of him, he might be a little more physical than Ivan, and maybe a little bit better of a shooter. But Ivan was just a crafty big guy who, left here as kind of I think he was all Pac-12 towards the end, and a guy who carved out a pretty nice career, overseas. So if you're getting Ivan point, and again, I don't think Veesaar's here as long as Ivan will be, but if you can get, I think Ivan was a 15-point guy at one point. If you can get that out of Veesaar, great.
And I think with I look at him right now, and I tell people a little bit to just kind of pump the brakes here, because I think people now in this day and age, you look at and you're used to getting these 5-star players that come in immediately and drop 20 and 10, your DeAndre Aytons, guys like that. This is a different animal because, yes, while he's been playing overseas, you can just tell by looking at the pictures that he's incredibly physically immature still, which is to be expected. I mean, he's 17 years old, and you don't find a lot of guys that come over internationally and just dominate the college basketball scene in year one. So when I've been asked my expectations, I always kind of look at Brad and I'm like, give me 9 and 6, give me 10 and 6 that first year. And then that second year, let's really emerge into that. That's more of my wavelength. I mean, I see people saying that they expect 17 and 8, and I just don't see that.
I think what we forget is, one, you have to transition to a very different game of basketball.
Right.
The European game to the American college game are very, very different. In some ways, I actually think from style of basketball, it's actually a little bit easier to transition from Europe to the NBA.
Right.
Secondly, he's a kid who's going to have to transition to America and to an American college campus. I don't know his background exactly, but a lot of these guys have basically been semi-pro basketball players. And then they have to come and actually get used to more rigorous academics, less time on the basketball court. And then there's just, for some, there's a slight language barrier. I mean, most of these guys can speak English, but to speak English, to the ability to go to class and learn in English,
right?
To, communicate with your coaches, to communicate with teammates. And then you throw in all the other stuff that 18-year-old kids deal with, girls and parties and cars and driving. And, some of these guys in Europe have never driven.
Right.
And, look, I think Carissa just got his driver's license. Doesn't mean he hasn't driven, but,
No, I know what you're saying. A lot of them haven't driven on the same side of the road.
Exactly. So here you've got all these things, and then to expect him to compete at the highest level of basketball. That being said, he's an immensely talented basketball player. And I would say the other thing that sometimes surprises a lot of the European players is strength training. There's not the premium in Europe of strength training in some of the programs. Again, I don't know his. And, there are a lot of countries especially, certain parts of Europe that don't have an LA Fitness or a Vasa Fitness on every corner. So it's not like you can just go down and buy a $30 gym membership and go lift if your, school team or club team doesn't put a premium on it. So that's one of the things we're seeing. Not everyone comes to America looking like Omar Ballo. A lot of them come looking, like who's the kid, our other guy coming in this class who's a strength.
Oh, Dylan Anderson.
Well, yes. I was thinking the Croatian kid, but there's a lot to get used to. So to expect 15 and 8, it could have happened. It could, because he's immensely talented. But it's not a disappointment if he's a 9 and 6 guy.
Okay, so now let me ask you, Henri Veesaar. He feels very much like a Gonzaga type, player that they bring in, they stash for a year or two, and within 2 years he's Domantas Sabonis or something like that. That's kind of the way that I look at it for the University of Arizona right now. What I am curious though is you look at the front court right now. You've got Henri Veesaar, you've got Umar Ballo, you've got Azuolas Tubelis. Just on the surface, does that feel like a unit that is good enough to be able to go far in March? We're not even talking about the other, just that unit right there.
Yeah, I think a lot of it depends, though, on if you get Dallin Terry back, that gives you so much more flexibility.
Right.
Because he does add that rebounding component, that length component. So you throw in, and I think you cannot discount Dylan Anderson. I don't think he's logging a bunch of minutes this year.
Right.
But at the very least, he gives you flexibility of being able to throw out a 6'10", 6'11" guy if you get into foul trouble. Mm. So does it look like one that can take you deep? Yes. Would you feel better with one more piece, whether that's the Washington State transfer, the Kentucky transfer, the pipe dream maybe of Leonard Miller coming in? Yes, you would feel much better. But at the very least, that's 3 nice players to put there. Plus you throw in Dylan Anderson. Plus in a real pinch, you can throw in small. Now, going small again would be a lot easier with Dallin Terry because of him being a legit 6'7",
right,
with a 6'10" wingspan. But you have pieces there, so I think you can. But I would feel better with one more piece.
Okay, now, excuse me here. Okay, so just had a text message go off. I wanted to ask you about Jack Murphy before we move on. You've known Jack Murphy a long time. You've been in this business a long time. I'm sure you remember when Jack was an undergrad here at the U of A.
Yes, I remember.
I'm sure you do.
Yeah, I do. Because he to become a coach, he read everything we wrote. In fact, I think he wrote everything when we were the only ones writing it.
Right.
Because there was a time when Cat Trex was the only person covering, a little bit with the Star and Citizen. I happen to know he listened to the old radio show and may or may not have called in under an alias from time to time. But yeah, I've known Murph a long time. Murph has always been a guy who's been driven to be a coach. So he learned everything he could, even when he was just a guy handing out towels, rolling out basketballs, setting up hoops. He knew all the top players.
What makes him so good at the international recruiting? Now, I mean, I think a lot of people could say, all right, well, it would make sense that he, can recruit domestically, but this man has really made his bones being able to recruit internationally just during his time here at the U of A. You got Tubelis, you got Mathurin, Veesaar is another big part of it. You're going to continue to see that. What's that special sauce that he's got?
Well, one, it's being able to evaluate talent. 2, it's being able to sift through all the rigmarole of figuring out who you can actually bring in, who's eligible, who wants to come in, and one thing you do see with the European guys who come in, the reason they want to play in America is because it's a quicker transition to an NBA roster.
Right.
You're not being drafted 27th and stashed in Europe for 3 years. You're going generally right to an NBA roster when you do leave and get drafted. So he's able to do that. He can talk basketball on a number of different levels, whether it's with the coaches, with the families, with the players. He's a personable guy. and he's a grinder. And I think that's the main thing. When he came here, yes, he had recruited international a little bit. I know I believe he had a role in the Radinovich recruitment, more in just getting things processed and done like that. But he had a role. At the time they were recruiting Radinovich, they were also looking at another European big guy because they were desperate for bigs at that time, if you remember. But a lot of it's just learning on the fly under Miller. Once Miller said, looked at the landscape and knew they were trouble getting those domestic recruits, he went and figured out how to do it and has done it very well. And then being able to then learn under Tommy Lloyd as well. One thing, Lute was able to recruit internationally when he tried.
Right.
Didn't do it a whole lot.
Have to. Right.
Didn't have to a whole lot. Some didn't work out. You have Tokus who went back because he was offered money. Bart Mitlu never worked out, but other guys did. And there was other guys we know wanted to come play for Lute internationally, but couldn't clear the hurdles. So I think he just learned, and that's the kind of guy Murph is, a guy who's just a sponge to learn and improve his craft.
Do you think that Arizona's roster construction looks like it's going to be probably, and this is just a guess, half and half domestic, half and half international? I think it's going to be very much along that Gonzaga line. The only thing, and you hear this a lot from people on, especially when Gonzaga doesn't do well in the tournament, and they'll say, well, they kind of got out bullied there. They got pushed around. I used to subscribe to that theory until about 6 years ago, because it did feel like Gonzaga did usually by about the Sweet 16 just get punched in the face. But I tell people from now, guys, Gonzaga's been to 2 of the last 5 NCAA finals. They would have been a number 1 seed during the COVID year. Haven't they kind of disproven that critique to a certain degree?
I think the critique of them being bullied is less from stocking their roster with international players, because the international game is less finesse than it used to be back in the 80s and 90s when we were first exposed to it through the Dream Team.
Right.
I think it's more of a factor of 2 things that have afflicted Gonzaga, and they afflict Pac-12 teams. One, West Coast basketball just isn't as physical. It's not officiated that way.
Right.
2, for Gonzaga, I know people like to say that they're not battle tested. While they do have to face a bunch of grown men, the grown men who play at Loyola Marymount in Portland and Portland State are not the same grown men that you're running into in the Sweet 16 from the Big 12 and the Big East. And frankly, even, some of the mid-major teams, you look at the Daytons of the world and the Xaviers and Rose, it's just a different type of athlete than you get at the bottom half, especially of the West Coast Conference. I mean, yes, St. Mary's will always have talent, and BYU will always have talent, and they'll have 4-year players. But when you're looking at San Diego, when you're looking at Loyola Marymount, usually San Francisco, not this year's edition, you're not getting those physical grown men team. They may have grown men, but they're just not the talent that you're in, the athleticism you're seeing.
I think, let me ask you this, Brad. KB Thiel, I think, makes an interesting point, as he does usually. I think part of it is they haven't won a ring. People don't think they're legit because they get enough of those but never win it. If Lute Olson doesn't have a ring, if 97 doesn't occur, would Arizona basketball be viewed in some of the same prism that Gonzaga is?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Good point, Kobe. And he's a young buck throwing that out there.
Is Oregon, can look at Oregon's last 15 years. Mm-hmm. They've gotten to 1 Final Four. Right. Look at the resume of some other coaches, some other programs who've never quite gotten there. And I think it's a legit, at least in the way we do this. I think, that keeps some programs from going to, look at Purdue. Purdue's a really good basketball program. Never been to a Final Four, at least in the modern era.
Isn't that crazy?
Matt Painter has never got. Remember, and maybe you might be able to. There was a stretch there, even pre-Big Dog, where they seemed like they were a 1 or 2 seed every year. Never got past the Sweet 16. But yet we all consider Purdue a really good program, but they're not on the level of even like a Michigan State. Or
even close to that. Yeah.
But yet they're really good. But I think that national, just the same way, Sean Miller is not considered, Sean Miller had gone to one Final Four. We're speaking about him differently today.
By the
If
way,
one more shot goes down, he's a different coach.
By the way, you really made my day when you just mentioned the big dog right there. People don't, if you didn't live the big dog, you don't, and we're not talking about Brody Dryden, the big dog here. We're talking about Glenn Big Dog Robinson. If you lived that era, that was one of the meanest you-know-whats that I've ever seen in college basketball.
There was something about those mid-90s 6'7" power forwards. You go Rodney Rogers, you go Big Dog,
Lamont Murray,
John Wallace. Love those guys.
Right.
Even Corliss, as much as he broke our hearts. But I may or may not have a Big Dog Bucks purple jersey sitting in the closet somewhere.
Speaking of which, have I told you about the DraftKings Sportsbook app, code word PHNX?
I think you've mentioned it a couple times.
All right. Well, I put this out on Twitter because there was something on there that said DraftKings Sportsbook app, and then I just put on there code word PHNX. If you know, you know. And there was like 8 people that I guess knew it because they liked it. But here's all you got to do. You put in $5, you get $150 in free plays if you bet on an NBA game. It doesn't matter who wins. New customers only, though. Arizona only, 21 and up. Gambling problem, call 1-800-NEXT-STEP. Speaking of gambling, let's talk some gambling now. Arizona football, before I never know what to do with Arizona football OUs. The last 2 years, I don't know what I thought last year, but I loved the Arizona over 1 win during the Sumlin COVID year. I would have lost money on it. Arizona football is at 2.5 wins in Vegas right now. Brad, I like the over of 2.5 wins, and I feel actually pretty good about the over.
I think if you think they're going to win 2 of the non-conference games, you hammer the over. If you think they're winning 1, then you're considering the over. If you think they're starting the season 0-3, bet the under. Because I don't think the team recovers. Because this is a team, and it's a cliche, but there's some truth to it. You have to learn how to win.
Right.
And last year, they didn't know how to win. You look at games that they kind of blew the BYU game. I think they blew obviously the NAU game. They blew the Utah game. It's hard to really blame them for the UCLA loss when you lose your starting quarterback. And there's no reason Colorado should have beat them up. But if you look at it, there's some weak teams in the conference. While their non-conference doesn't have any gimmies, if Arizona has improved to a certain level, I think they have a chance in all 3. Because one, as good as North Dakota State is, they still have to travel to Tucson and win a 1A game on the road. San Diego State's not quite as good as they were last year, but you're getting them on the road. They're opening the new stadium. But is that really big of a deal to San Diego State fans? Are there enough San Diego State fans to make that a big deal? And as talented as Mississippi State probably is, those teams from the SEC do not do well when they travel. That's why they don't travel.
Well, they're also, too, especially when you're looking at generally the bottom feeders of the SEC as well. I think people have this, and our good friend Kevin Woodman would always bring this point up, that the SEC, yes, Alabama, Georgia, every now and then LSU, no qualms. You get all the kudos you get. But man, there's a lot of crap there too. There's a lot of Mississippi States.
I'll tell you, look at South Carolina. Take out a 2 or 3 year run from Spurrier and a 2 or 3 year run from Lou Holtz, and it's a bad football program.
Yeah.
Obviously Vanderbilt. Now, here's the thing with the SEC that I think you can say that 9 or 10 of the teams, if you have the right coach in place, can become a national power. I don't know if you can say that in other conferences. But they're also just as capable of being. There was a decade and a half, the DiNardi era, where LSU was a 6-win program.
Jerry DiNardo.
There was a lot. Look at Tennessee now. Tennessee won a national title in the last 20 years and is a bad football program or mediocre.
For children of the 90s, I'll give you a better example. For children of the 90s, Brad, you're kind of stuck in between there. You're a child of the 80s and the 90s. So you know what? We'll grandfather you in. But when I was growing up, I never knew half of these programs as having anything in football. LSU never mattered in football. I know you had a Kevin Falk and a Rondell Mealy or something, but nobody cared about LSU. Auburn was a non-entity as well. Alabama, for a good percentage of the 90s, early 2000s, was, I mean, you could probably make the case that, and I could be totally wrong on this, but from about 94 to 2000, that Arizona football was probably better than Alabama football. I mean, so there's this conception with people now, especially the younger crowd, that all these teams have always been just dominant, and not really.
They all have had windows.
Yeah.
And that's true of most programs. I mean, if you want to talk mid-90s, there was a stretch there where Tennessee and Nebraska football were as good as there was. And right now they're
not as good as there is.
Middling programs. Pre-Spurrier, Florida was Now they're really good. But so it takes the right guy, the right stretch. Now, is it easier for Alabama to hire a B coach and be an A program? Yes. Georgia. Their talent is there. Florida. So let's not discount. And again, Alabama, what Alabama's doing now is a modern dynasty, maybe the most impressive thing in college football.
For sure.
Maybe history. But let's not pretend. Yes. So Mississippi State, will they have more good players in Arizona? Absolutely. But they're coming west, again, SEC teams do not come west, and when they do, they lose.
Right.
Look at last year at UCLA, LSU. Look at ASU beating LSU. Don't look at LSU coming to Tucson. But you know, and you never know with a Mike Leach team either. That could be a 60-point.
Wait a second, Brad. Is Alabama preparing to come to Arizona in 9 years and lose then? Is that what you're saying?
No, I don't think Alabama comes to Arizona in 9 years. You
think that somehow they buy that one out?
Yeah.
All right. So you're saying
because if Arizona's good, they're not coming.
So and if Arizona's Arizona, you really don't want anything to do with that.
Yeah. Then you're like, hey, can we go play that in the Cardinal Stadium or something? I don't know. Yeah.
Really?
I would not necessarily think Alabama ever makes it here.
So as many of you may know, I've been sick with COVID and pneumonia. So I've been going through and looking at a lot of my old media stuff. And I wanted to let you know here, and I got a question here. Brad Alice is in a lot of these Cat Tracks publications right here. Got some very cool vintage high school pictures of Mike Bibby, then Steven Jackson. Very cool. Hold on. But here's my question, though, William. How many of these recruiting tournaments, and be honest here, did John Schuster actually go to where he's writing about Mike Bibby and his prowess on the high school scene?
I joined Cat Tracks about 96 as an undergrad.
Okay.
Where I was first doing illustrations, if you really must know, then covering the Ice Cats and women's basketball. And then they would give me, because Schuster and Mordich did not love recruiting, they would give They would give me the phone sheet and I'd call recruits, and that was like you were calling them on their house phone.
Right.
So I saw Bibby play as a junior. And I think one of the reasons I was brought onto a bigger role is so Schuster and Mortis could avoid the tournaments. So I don't know who he saw pre-97.
Right.
I think he went to 2 or 3 events with me.
Because these articles are not written with the normal John Schuster flair /
But you also have to remember, there were no video.
Yeah.
There was no internet sites to get scouting reports on. What you were doing is you were getting high school coaches telling you about them. You were getting people around the program telling you about them. So it was hard to write. I've told people and I saw Shakur play, but I've told people I had an intern called Shakur and got his dad. And all he said, the only quote he could get out of Shakur's dad is Mustafa is Mustafa. And Mustafa's very good. Okay.
Well, thanks for the heads up.
I took those quotes and wrote a 5-paragraph story talking about how Mustafa, although Mustafa is a fan of East Coast point guards, he tries to have a unique flair all to his game. Mustafa is Mustafa, said Papa Shakur. So yeah, it was the Wild West at times back then. And you get to a tournament, and if the kid wasn't in the book, you couldn't get it on your phone to figure out who the kid really was. I mean, I remember the first time, probably towards the middle of my run, whether we were a scout at the time, I'm not sure, being able to actually call up a photo on the phone to confirm the kid wearing the number 33 jersey was really the kid I was there to scout, because he looked shorter, and it turned out it was the kid. He just was really 6'3" and not 6'6". But and I'm sure you've seen some of that going to tournaments. Now it's a whole different game with smartphones and high quality video. But back then, yeah, recruiting stories were hard to write.
If you ever wanted to be involved in something where you don't have to guess the legitimate size of something, that sounds terrible. The DraftKings Sportsbook app, code word PHNX. This is the girth. This is coming with everything right here. And code word PHNX, you put in $5, you get $150 in free plays. Going on right now, you just got to be a new customer. Brad, that was a very slick transition, was it not?
I was hoping it wasn't for another product you've endorsed, so maybe
yeah, well, we'll get to that one. All right, Brad, before we sign off here, we the folks like when we talk a little bit of women's basketball here, and the team's obviously good. It gives us a real reason to, obviously to talk about it. Now, it looks like Adia Barnes has kind of got her template in play next year. You got to figure that Maya Nagy will be starting or will be playing major minutes in some capacity in the front court. You don't bring in the best big player in the country not to. Kate Reese is going to be playing 30 minutes a game, something that you're bringing in Jade Lavelle from ASU, who's probably coming in to play 25, 28 minutes a game. You got two different transfers that can both play Oklahoma State, West Virginia. You got Pellington. All of a sudden, this roster now has a lot of players where a lot of minutes are being spoken for, as opposed to about a month ago where we were wondering who exactly is going to be playing where.
Well, we knew they were bringing Reese and Pellington back. We knew they had three really high-quality freshmen. So that was right. 5 of your 8-player rotation, probably.
Right.
So now you mix the 3 transfers in, and I think they have another 1 or 2 quality players left over from last year. Not a whole lot. They got Ware back, and she'll at least be a role player, if not a starter. But yeah, so I didn't really have a big concern because I knew that they would be. I knew in reality, while you were missing 8 or 9 players, you need 8 or 9 total, and right. They already had 5 or 6 or 7 spoken for. So I'm not real worried now. The only thing now is you have to mesh them. You have to hope that you can find a secondary scorer behind Kate Reese. That was the real problem last year. Points sometimes came at a premium, including in that tournament loss. But if they can find, 65 points, they should win a lot of games, because this is going to be another good defensive team again. You have to mesh the freshmen with the transfers with the returning players. That's going to be the biggest challenge. You have to make sure the freshmen are ready to go. But 2 are McDonald's All-Americans, and 1 is a 4-star equivalent. So I don't really worry about that as much as you might if you're bringing in a couple 3-stars or an international player you weren't sure about, because she has brought in some very highly regarded international players, and they haven't necessarily been ready, and then they leave. So
can Arizona be a consistent top 5 to 7 program in the nation, Arizona women's basketball?
Yes, and I think part of the reason is Adia's ascension is coming at the right time. Other programs that have been traditionally good are falling off a little bit. What we have seen, especially in women's college basketball, is this more so than men's college basketball is coach driven. Look, Tennessee is better now, but they have not come anywhere close to the Summit era. Remember, again, you want to talk child in the 90s. Remember Old Dominion women's basketball, La Tech. Those used to be the big programs. Not anymore. UConn is probably the one that's going to transfer. But can they? What will they be post Gino? What will Stanford right. will probably always be good because they're academics. But there was a time USC was the big dog in the Pac-12 behind Stanford. They're not quite that good anymore. Right now, it's Oregon and UCLA and Arizona. So, yeah, it comes at the right time. As long as Adia Barnes is recruiting at a high level, as long as she keeps winning and attracting these players, Arizona has a chance to move up into that echelon. Then the bigger question comes, what is life like after Adia? And the good news is she's got 20 years if she wants it.
Well, and that's the key too, where I think she really does kind of have a Lute Olson situation on her hands here, which is a very good thing to have. And that no matter whatever happens with this program, good or bad, you will get the full credit. Nobody's going to say, oh, well, so-and-so also won a title there, or, Dean Smith won. Dean Smith, but you know what I'm saying, like with the Roy Williams thing. Whereas she's going to get the full credit. Where, like with Lute Olson, when people look at Lute Olson's resume and they see the 4 Final Fours and the national title, nobody says, and this is with all due respect to Fred Snowden because he did some very good things here, but nobody looks and said, well, you really got to, consider that Fred Snowden did the same thing. No, it's just not the same. And Adia Barnes is on that pedestal now where whatever she does is going to be her full credit.
In fact, in many ways, I think you make a distinct point. Joan Bob-Massini can become the Fred Snowden.
Yeah.
Fred Snowden showed that you could win at Arizona. And if Fred Snowden had not had success at Arizona, Lute Olson would not have come.
Right.
That being said, Snowden had a different landscape. You had to win your conference. You had to play basically UCLA to get out of the West. I get it. But Snowden had 1 or 2 good runs in the tournament. Deep runs. Because again, it was a different thing. So he showed that, you can win Arizona. You can put some butts in the seats, but Lute took it to the next level. Just like if Jed Fish or whoever gets Arizona consistently to an 8, 9, 10 win program, you'll look back fondly at Tomey. But again,
Tomey she'll easily move on though.
Tomey was the Snowden, was the Bonvicini of that. It's not like replacing Jerry Kindle.
Right.
With your Lopez, and then later, it's not like replacing Mike Candrea. It's not like, no offense, but if someone comes in and surpasses what Dave Rubio does, Rubio becomes that person. Rubio kept Arizona relevant for a long time. He's only made the 1 Final Four run.
Right.
So there's room to grow some of these programs, whereas, again, Adia Barnes can get him to that level, just like Lute did.
All right. He's William Brad Alice. William, you can follow him on Twitter at WSR Brad. You can always find him here on Tuesdays at 12:30. Brad, you got any podcasts coming up anytime soon?
Yeah, I just got to get them recorded. Got some ideas. Was kind of waiting for the Veesaar news to really break. So, we'll be having some stuff over the summer. Just, it's been a busy time with youth sports.
Oh, by the way, how's Tyler doing?
Season's over. Won his last 3 his only 3 starts, and he made the majors all-star team, even though he played at a lower level. They're moving up with the 12-year-olds, and so he'll get.
I heard he's got the smoke behind him.
He's pitching. Yeah, in his last 3 starts, I know it's Little League, but 17 strikeouts in 6 innings.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
5 runs given up.
I was going to say that's better than I would do. I'll put it to you like that.
Oh, he's like, I didn't do that good. I'm like, I would be bragging now about because I was a lousy baseball player.
Well, right. And these kids too, I always like to, and I'm not saying that Tyler's doing this because I'm sure he's not, but I also like to I can't remember. I was watching something because I've been watching a lot of TV, and it was like the middle school championships from 2 years ago. And this kid scores like 55 points. He's clearly the best player on the court. And, the commentator's asking him, well, what does this performance mean to you? It's the highest scoring, blah, blah, blah. And he says, I just take it one game at a time. I didn't really feel that I did much. Dude, shut up, man. Dude, bask in the limelight. It's okay to be a kid.
Tyler, I don't think understands baseball well enough to know what his stats mean.
Right.
Because he'll be like, well, I gave up some hits. I gave up a run. I'm like, a run in Little League is
right.
Yeah. And again, he's the number 2 pitcher. I say the number 1 pitcher is really, really good. Like, he's the club ball kid. He's the kid who is out there throwing every day, whether mom and dad want him to or not. So he's like, well, I'm not this kid. I'm like, well, yeah, that kid's, can you work as hard as that kid? So that's just Tyler for you. He's, I'll do the talking, I guess. And he can be like, I don't know. Can I play Fortnite? He'd kill me for that. Can I play Apex?
Yeah. He's Brad Alice. I'm Mike Luke. Thanks so much for listening to the AZ Wildcats podcast.